Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Cape Cast Writing a Comedy Pilot. My name is Jess Ju. I'm the Director of Programs and Operations at Cape. And just a few things before we get started with our amazing writers who are both alumni of our Cape New Writers Fellowship. We are now taking submissions for our 2021 class. This is the first time we're going to be all virtual. So, residency in Los Angeles is no longer a prerequisite, but please, we do still have some other requirements. Please check that out and all the rules, regulations, and how to apply at our website, capeusa.org. CNWF, capitals do matter, so make sure they're all lowercase. And as well, we're going to be taking questions later on in tonight's Cape Cast, so please ask your questions in the chat box, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Without further ado, I am so excited to bring in our writers. Paul Chang, hello.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us, Paul. And Vidhya Iyer, thank you so much for joining us, guys. It's so good to see you.
You as well.
So good to see
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So let's get right into it. I think people want to learn about writing and kind of your process. I mean, I know you're two individual writers and everyone has their own different ways of approaching things, but let's start like Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music. Let's start at the very beginning. When you are writing or planning to write a new comedy pilot, where are you getting your ideas? Where are you drawing inspiration? Are you looking for something that you find inherently funny or just an interesting idea and finding an angle of comedy into it? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of where I get ideas, I feel like they can come from anywhere. I try to watch a lot of stuff, read scripts, read books, listen to a lot of podcasts. Can't really do stuff in the pandemic anymore. So back in the age where we could do things, we're trying, do things like if there's a fun hobby or something to pick up, just learn about a new topic. And yeah, I do really love when the log line is already funny, kind of what you were saying, where you can immediately see irony or humor, just baked into the concept, because when it's like that, then the concept is already doing some of that work for you before you even start writing. So I always like that. I think Barry is a great example of that. It's murderous hitman decides to try and become an actor. You can immediately see oh, I see where the fun of that idea is. So yeah, I do really like when an idea is funny right off the bat. Although there are plenty of shows that are just millennials wrestling with love and friendships in New York, and they that totally Fleabag or Insecure or something. There's plenty of that as well. But yeah, I do like it when the concept is a bit hooky.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up millennials dating. I would put a pin in that. We'll get back to that. But Vidya, how about you? How are you sourcing those initial kernels for your pilots?
I think for me specifically, I kind of try to find some aspect of my life that is thematically interesting to me, whether it's just oh, well, what is it like when a kid gets overburdened with responsibility, which is something I experienced, or what is it like when you're feeling so much pressure to be perfect and live a life that won't disappoint your family. All of that is just something that I'm oh, this is my personal experience. And then I find a good way where I'm oh, but what is the most complicated and high stakes conflict version of this situation, and kind of just fictionalize from there. So I think that helps me kind of I want to say wiggle a little bit between genres, even when it comes to comedy, dramedy, but also writing genre and writing more fictional fantasy kind of stuff. I still just start from that place for me personally of what is something that if I'm the protagonist of the story, what are things that I would wrestle with, and then kind of transpose that onto a fictional character and then work from there.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. And I guess once you have that initial idea, maybe that initial, setup or situation, or even maybe a character, How are you actually taking those next steps to developing it into a full-fledged pilot? Whether do you start with the world and build it out, or are you starting with the relationships first? Do you storyboard, or are you, just kind of walk us through your approach of how you get to a first draft? I'll be fair. Vidhya, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think for me, I want to start with relationships. That's just my personal approach with everything. I'm like, who is the core relationship that we're tracking, that we are rooting for, that we're concerned about, whose emotions that will make us want to come back and watch the next episode of the TV show. That's what I usually start with. And then I build a world from there. If it is something fantasy, you can always like have fun building the world of like, what are the rules? What are the creatures? What does this world look like? And if it is just like millennials are dating in their 20s, it's just what is the world of the show. Like I like to, even if it isn't a multi-cam, kind of think about where the show is going to be living a lot of the time. Like, are we, because I think for me the biggest example is like shows like Happy Endings, which is one of my favorite TV shows. They don't really get into what anyone does for a long time. And you don't know what their jobs are. They know what their jobs are, hopefully, or maybe they figured it out on season 2 or, towards the middle of season 1. But you don't really get into the worlds of what these people do. You just spend time with these friends who like hang out with each other all the time. So I kind of go, that's my next step of like, what are the things that we're seeing? Is this a show where we're following these people and just their lives on their downtime? Are we seeing their work life and that sort of thing? And from there, I kind of just try to build of beats of the episode, which is just like, what happens? Break it into acts and see the big beats of like, A meets B, A breaks up with B, and A then tells B that I'm pregnant with your child, like whatever it is. Kind of building out from there, and then fleshing out outlines and kind of writing the script from that moment.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you said about characters and the importance of characters. I think especially maybe more true in comedy than in drama, because it is really about spending time with funny people, right? In funny situations versus in a drama pilot, and like what we spoke with last week, world or context or plot or stories is extremely important. But it's true, like even a show like Friends, it's really just 6 friends hanging out. Has done, I don't know if you guys heard about the show, but it's done fairly well, and since it's been on air. So Paul, how about you? What is your approach like?
So in terms of like what for me, like the core idea could be anything. It could be a character, it could be like a plotty type thing, like an inciting incident type of thing, or a world. So once I have that initial idea, I like to try and build around it in a way that like makes things as difficult and as funny as possible for the character. So if my initial idea is a plot type of thing, it's like an inciting incident, I'll start thinking like, who are the most interesting characters that I could like insert into this, or if it's a world, I'll ask that same question. Or if it's a character, I might ask the question like, what's the most interesting world or situation I could put them into? So it's kind of like taking the initial idea and then building around that in a way that like maximizes conflict, and hopefully there's some humor just baked into it as well. And then, in terms of like taking it forward, I don't necessarily like have a strict process. I feel like every script I write is a little bit different, but generally what I do is I'll try and go from that initial idea to like a beat sheet or something resembling that, and then an outline. And I like to get feedback, like of a writer's group. So I'll, at each stage, like I'll try and, just kind of run it by a couple friends, maybe by managers or something. Because I feel like, even when we're talking about like picking ideas, that's kind of helpful too. Like what I'm finding funny, and if I'm really passionate about something, I'll just run with that. But sometimes I'm in a situation where I have like 3, 4, 5 ideas, and like they're all kind of, I could go for any of them, and so that's always really helpful to kind of see like what's my writing group responding to? What are they liking? What are they hating? Sometimes they'll be like, oh yeah, like that's already, someone else already did that, you know. So that can be kind of helpful too before like choosing to invest in a project.
Yeah. I will be very transparent. I've been doing some info sessions about the fellowship, and like and the question I get a lot is like, what are very common stories you read, or what are scripts that like are very common? And my go-to answer is always, you know, millennials dating, which I very much I understand is ironic, because both you and Vidya, your scripts were essentially in some way, shape, or form or about millennials dating. But you guys did such an incredible job of creating such distinct characters. So I guess, what is your take on the millennials dating in the comedy pilot? Should we still be trying to like revamp and find interesting ways into this, or is this something we just like gotta move on from? Like maybe try to write something different. Do you still write millennial dating?
Oh, I'm a sucker for rom-com, so like I'm always down for that. I do think though, like, yeah, because there are so many, well, I mean, like, there's so many angles into it. So like anyone can like tackle that at any time. You know what I mean? Like everyone's going to have their own unique angle into it. Like to what Vidya was talking about before, like mining your own personal experiences. That's always going to like infuse into the script to make it unique. But I do think because it's so common and it's not like high concept in the way that like a Barry is, for example, that like, yeah, it means that it has to be kind of like the execution has to be that much better, you know, versus something that's a little more hooky. I think there's a little bit more leeway because just right off the bat, people are like, oh, I want to see how this plays out. Whereas like if it's just friends hanging around and talking, there's a way to do that and make it really interesting. But yeah, you might have to be a little bit more inventive, you know, and Fleabag is a great example. You know, she just did such a great job of taking just a person kind of like living and struggling and you know, not doing anything crazy necessarily, but like having such an interesting character. And she kind of like played with form and stuff as well. So I think that's a great example of like taking, you know, a concept that is not necessarily in and of itself like groundbreaking, but executing it in such a like interesting and fresh and new way.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I think what Paul says on point is just having this like unique take on it and making sure that take is unique enough on it. And I think for me, for my personal script, it was like adding just the specificity of my culture and my background to it, and my specific, even within the specificity of the culture, just like my heightened specificity of my family and how high stakes my family makes my dating life. So that, I think, just making it as specific to your experience as possible. But like when you think about Fleabag and when you think about even Insecure and all of these things, it's just like playing with the visuals, which I think is something you can do more and more now than you could, you know, when it was just broadcast. It's just like, what are we seeing and how are we coming across putting this millennials dating thing across? Are we inside their minds? Are we seeing, you know, millennial adult versions of hormone monsters? Like there's so many different ways to kind of play out millennials dating. There was like a very I don't know how long it went on, but there was a short like Jay Baruchel like FX show where he's like dating like trolls and stuff, and like that was thank you,
love that
but
show.
Like it's just it was so interesting, and for me, like I couldn't get into it beyond a certain point, but it is interesting. Like you're just like, I want to watch at least the pilot and see what happens in this. And I think there's just so many different ways of just like heightening one aspect of it, or just introducing one unexpected element to it. If it is millennials dating, that you can just make it your take.
Yeah, I mean, I love a rom-com as well. You know, that's basically my favorite genre of content, whether it's film or TV. But I do think there needs to be a certain like element of perspective or a different perspective that makes it beyond what we've already seen. So thanks, guys. Okay, so we're talking about comedy pilots. We're talking about comedy. It's an extremely subjective thing. I mean, script writing in general, right? What's good and bad is subjective. And then you're adding an element of comedy over it. And people have such different senses of humor, whether, you know, whoever's reading it, whether it's your your representatives or someone who's looking to hire you? Or, you know, maybe even like, does your tone even fit the show that you are up for? So how do you gauge if your comedic pilot is hitting the right tone and getting the right kind of laughs? Is there a right kind of laugh? Is a laugh a laugh? Like, is that a win no matter why it's happening?
Yeah, I mean, for me, oh, go ahead, Vidya.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, for me, the main thing is like, if I think it's funny, that's like the main thing. Learning to kind of trust in that. But then, yeah, for sure, like I always, you know, run it by my writers group. I basically just show it to people, just see like what that feedback is. You know, maybe I might show it to someone and they're like, yeah, you know, this needs a punch up. You know, and that might be an indication that like it's really funny to me, but it might not be hitting for other people, right? So yeah, like I, you know, start with what I think is good and kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think that's always a good way to start. Is just like, see if you find it funny, it's more likely than not at least 10 people find it funny. That's like a good starter place. And then I think what Paul said is on point, is just like get as much feedback as you possibly can. And I think there is a weird gauge, because sometimes your sense of humor, yeah, it is subjective, and people's senses of humor are very different. But that's where your voice thing comes in, right? It's just like, if you're able to make your weird sense of humor and then justify it for a broader audience, that's where like your character work comes into a pilot, where it is just like, here's my really absurd take on why like someone getting their organs taken out of them in a bathtub is really, really funny, right? And then I think the part that comes in where it's not subjective anymore, it's just like you justify that character finding that funny in an interesting way. It's just like, oh well, like I that just came to my mind because I had like some sort of organ.
I was like, did you come across
something.
a body did you just come across like a body with all the organs missing recently?
Not yet, but I'm
not
hoping
yet.
I will at some point.
It's on the bucket list. It's on the bucket list. All right,
noted. On the bucket list. I'm just hoping it's not my own body, right? Like I don't want to be the person waking up in the bathtub and my kidneys are missing. But I don't know. I had like a joke somewhere in a pilot about like what's it called? A black market organ selling thing, and I thought it was hilarious. And I cannot tell you, like, that was the most divisive joke I ever had. Where, like, half of my writers group was not for it. Half of my writers group was just like, this is very funny. My manager, like, every other draft I sent him would be like, should we keep this in? I think it's funny, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like, it was just like this very divisive back and forth of like, is it funny? Is it too dark? Is it funny? Is it too dark? And to this day, I don't know if it's funny or is it too dark for everybody, but I think it's really funny. Like, to this day, I stand by it, and I'm like, oh, I thought it was hilarious. And obviously, you need the context for it, but like, I'm like, justifying it in that moment for that character is what makes it work for me. I'm like, oh, this character thinks this is funny for this reason. And that's the joke. The joke isn't a person with their organs cut out of them. It's this person in this moment finding that funny and why they find it funny. That's the joke, right? No, people dying is never funny, but like even on like the show I'm on, like we have so much violence and people, like a bunch of people die all the time. But like that's not the funny part. It's the people reacting and how they die and why these characters are doing these things and the lengths they're going to achieve something so minuscule. Like I want to get elected to the head of the neighborhood association. That's why I'm killing like hundreds of people right now.
Yeah.
Like that's why it's funny. And yes, it's a cartoon, so that obviously makes it easier. But it's just like, I think for a character, justifying why they find something funny is always a good way to sidestep like why it's subjective and making it more subjective, because you're putting that subjective thing onto a character and not onto yourself for that moment. And I think
so just
that
hide
has
behind your characters. Hide behind your characters, and if
use them as
someone
a
doesn't
shield.
like it, it's that's why not? I for comedy, I mean, both of you guys are talking about, you know, just writing jokes, but I mean, I've spent many times with you guys. You guys are funny people. Were you always funny people, or is that a muscle you had to flex or cultivate? And how do you do that? I mean, we can read books on structure and work on story structure. We can, you know, take classes on so and so, but how do you become funny, or how do you get funnier?
I was born this way.
Perfect.
No, I'm kidding. I was born the funniest person on the planet. No, I think it is a muscle. I definitely think it's shaped by just what you're passionate about. Like, and that's the thing, even with comedy, just like comedy is a very broad tent. Like there is broadcast comedy, there is like dramedies, and there's like I May Destroy You is a comedy, Fleabag's a comedy, but also, you know, and not just because they say it, like it is, they have very funny moments in those shows. And I think having like I mean, for me to like really just build that muscle, I started doing improv, and I tried my hand at stand up, and I just perform every now and then because I think that helps your muscle as a comedy person, because the punch up part of things especially is just like it has to be so quick, it has to be so heightened, and you need to be able to understand what things sound like off the page, which is not near as important in a drama situation. But like for comedy, like the words really matter. Changing, you know, an as to a like changes the cadence of something and makes it somehow funnier than it was a second ago.
Yeah, or
And
even
so
switching the phrasing, right?
Yeah, it is a little. Yeah, and those are the things where I'm like, oh, it's little things, but those are muscles that you build. And like I've seen it in just like comedians and writers that I admire who are able to really like perform that mental like parkour that you need to do to really like make the best version of a joke happen as quickly as possible. And I think that muscle needs to be built just by it. I think for me, improv personally helped a lot and continues to help. And just like getting some sort of performing experience. Even when I was in school, like my teachers would always be like, you know, go take an improv class, go take an acting class. And I think it just helps because as a writer, it helps to know what your writing actually sounds like. And when you have to say it out loud, you're like, oh, this sounds really funny on paper, but it's not as funny, and it's so many words and my actor can't say it. And you know, you get a much better sense of like saving real estate and getting like the biggest return on investment in the work you're putting on a paper.
Yeah. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I mean that resonates with me as well, because like I did a lot of improv and a little bit of sketch too, and that was super huge for me in terms of like honing my comedic sensibility. And yeah, like Vidhya was saying, just like building, there's so many skills that are important for writing that you build from doing improv. Like in a way, writing is kind of improving with yourself, you know, right? You're inhabiting different characters, and you're putting words in their mouths, and you're responding to them, right? And you're kind of like being the puppeteer. So it's very similar. Even when you're in the writer's room, there's so many skills that carry over. You're like having to listen to what's going on and respond. You're yes-anding people. So yeah, like improv was super huge for me as well.
I also thirdly recommend improv. Lots of skills I learned in improv that I still use today. It's great. Not so great to watch all the time, but very, very fun to participate. It's more, especially for people who've only watched improv shows, try doing improv. It's much more fun, I promise you. All right. So moving on. So you have your pilot. At what point do you ask in the process, do you ask for outside eyes? I know, Paul, you talked about writers group. Vidya, you are obviously kind of sending out to managers and getting their input. But at what point is it ready for outside eyes? And what do you do about those notes you get?
So for me personally, I get notes from my writers group first, actually, before I really start sending things to my manager. Unless I'm on a tight deadline at some point, then I kind of send it to both of them at the same time. But for the most part, I mean, it happens, but I think I send it to my writers group first, when I have a complete first draft, I send it to my writers group. Because I think once I have like a first draft that I'm like, oh, I know that the concept is what I'm going for, the character is what I'm going for, the world is what I'm going for, and the premise is what I'm going for, I send it out. Once those 4 elements kind of have lined up, and then I just want to get like people's thoughts and people I trust thoughts on what's working, what's not working. Is this worth me writing another draft? Is this something that you're interested in? And then kind of I send it to my manager off of one round of notes from my writers group. I kind of get that, work on those notes, and then I send it off to my manager and get another round of notes. And with the notes, I think this is what most people do, but like with notes, it's like if everybody has the same note, it's a problem. If people have different parts and different notes, then it's something like a second tier thing where you're like, okay, there's something here, it's not what they're saying, but maybe it's something I need to look into. And I think just also having a good sense from your notes of like, is your beginning working and is your ending working, is always a good thing to just check in with your writers group of like, are you interested in what I've set up, and did it resolve in an interesting, satisfying, but like leaves you wanting to watch another episode, or did I resolve this too much to the point where it feels like a feature and you're like, I don't know if I need to watch another episode. So those are 2 things I always like to check in, because it's so easy to kind of go on either side of those things. It's like either leaving too much wide open or having too much happen, or resolving everything to the point where you're like, oh, well, it was fun and it was a great read, but I don't think it's an episode of TV because I don't need to come back and watch anything. It feels like everything was resolved and all the emotions were taken care of. Yeah. So that's kind of what I do.
How about you, Paul?
I like to get feedback as early as possible. So even at, like I was saying, I'll pitch log lines, and even I'll get, I like to get feedback before the draft. If I'm like really fired up and I just need to get out, then maybe I'll just like power through. But in general, I do like to get some eyes on it at least the outline stage, just because it's so much easier to make big changes before you've like put out 30 pages, or if it's a feature, you know, like 100 pages. Especially because, like, yeah, you know, the saying of like third act problems are first act problems and stuff like that. So I do really like to get eyes on the outline, and sometimes I'll go through like a couple versions of the outline before going to draft. And yeah, I totally agree with what you're just saying. If multiple people are giving me the same note, that's a problem. I'll definitely take that note. Everything else, just look at it, see how it like, you know, is it resonating with me? One piece of advice that I've heard about notes that I really love is that people will like often pitch stuff, and like people's pitch for like the solve may not be on point, but like people are never wrong about their reaction. Like if someone's like, I was bored here, they were just bored there. Like that's just the way they felt. And so their pitch for like how to fix that may or may not be, you know, maybe like a good solution, but their emotional reaction is just a straight fact, you know? And so if someone is framing their notes in terms of their emotional reaction, that's always when I'm kind of leaning in and paying attention of like, oh, I was bored here, or I was confused. Because like that's just a statement about how they were feeling, and it's like definitely true. So those are notes that I always like try and pay attention to.
All right, I have one more question for me before we open up to the general Q&A. But what do you think makes a good pilot great? What is that secret sauce that brings it to the next level? Do you know what it is, and do you know how to replicate it, and do you want to share that?
Well, since you said like what makes it good to great, I'll assume that like the big things are like there, like, you know, structurally it's pretty good, it's like pretty funny. For me, the big differentiator for like a great pilot is when they're just like super fun to read. Like for me, it's impossible to understate the importance of readability. You know, when like every sentence is kind of pulling me forward, is like doing something. You know, it's like funny, or it's surprising or unexpected, or there's some kind of like powerful emotional content there. Like when every single sentence is doing that, and when like I'm surprised to find that I'm at the end of the script, that's like to me the mark of a great script. And I feel like, because the opposite is really obvious, you know, when you're reading and it's like, oh my God, I'm only on page 3. That's when I know you know, I'm not enjoying the script. So I would say like focusing on readability and making sure that just like at the sentence and the word level, like it really flows. And I think a part of that is like clarity. Because in order to be like really readable, there can't be like any confusion or ambiguity, because like the second something is like a little bit like confusing, it just like bumps you, because now you have to like do mental work to just like figure out what's happening. So I think that like a big clarity is maybe a more like actionable way to frame readability, just like paying attention and making sure that like what is going on is like super easy to track at all times.
Oh. Hi, Vidhya. Can you hear us okay?
Hey. Yeah, I
You're
lost
good.
you guys for a minute. My internet.
No worries, no worries. We're just glad we're glad you came back. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about what makes a good pilot great.
What makes a good pilot great? I think it's and this is, I think, with any pilot, not even specific to comedy pilot, is just characters, and characters who are like as specific and as conflicted and as weird as they can possibly be. That it is just, I mean, there is just that aspect of like, at any point you have to realize with reading, you are part of a pile of scripts. At any stage of your career, you're still a part of a pile of scripts that's being read, whether it's like for staffing, for development, for your showrunner, for everything, you're still a part of a pile of scripts. And I think having that sense of, I need to stand out, and having a hook, but not in a like, oh, I need to make this just for the sake of like, oh, I'm gonna have an explosion on page 1 and then nothing's gonna happen in the rest of my pilot. But like having a sense that we need to know the most interesting things and the most painful things about your character within the first 5 pages, and understand why whatever it is that their conflict is, that their struggle is so hard for them to resolve. Like realizing that by the end of the pilot, and then having something that you want to see, you want to go on that journey with them. And I think when it comes specifically to what makes a good comedy pilot great, I think is just nailing the voices of your characters and kind of having a good sense of not just what your protagonist is doing, but what making every character around them their own 3-dimensional. Like, oh, I could totally want to follow a show about, if your protagonist is Vidhya, I want to follow a show about Vidhya, but I also want to follow a show about her friend Jess. And hey, I could totally see a spin-off about Paul Chang. Like, you need to have that sense of those characters, all of them capable of having their own shows. I think that's what I loved about I May Destroy You. I'm like, you finish watching that show and you're like, I want to watch a show about her best friend. And I want to watch a show about that other best friend of hers. And I want to watch a show about that one person who was in that one support group for like 2 seconds. Like, I would watch a show about that person. And that's, I think, to me, what makes a great like pilot and a great show in general is just like you have every character be the most interesting thing they can be for the 2 seconds or the 30 episodes that they're on screen.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, let's open up to Q&A with some really great questions coming in from our watchers. So the first one from Little Sparkles asks, what are 3 things to avoid in writing a comedy pilot? Do you want to do this collectively, or you want to list like 3 each? I'm down for either.
Let's do improv. Let's yes and each other.
Yes and. All right. I'll start. I hate it when people spend like half a page describing an exterior that has nothing to do with the story. Like they describe like a skyline of New York or like something that like really doesn't matter. And I'm like, I just wasted 30 seconds of my life reading about a skyline of New York. So I would say point 1, don't waste that. Go straight into characters, showing you what they're like, what their life is like. Before the inevitable like blow up of what their life is becoming. Popcorn to Paul.
And
Vidhya.
Yes,
popcorn to Vidhya.
Oh.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. I think don't describe things that aren't relevant. And I think if your pilot's like live action is not animated or like not something that's super like set in a heightened world, like everyone knows what the New York skyline is and it's pretty. Like we don't need you to tell us your hot take on how pretty the New York skyline is. But I also think the thing that I think is important, and this is like conflicting for me to say out loud because I love witty banter. I freaking love it. Like I'm like, oh, we're talking so fast. Like we could all be like Amy Sherman Palladino. Like we're in Gilmore Girls right now. I love that stuff, but that stuff without substance is extremely frustrating to read pages and pages of. Because it's like, yes, then you're telling me that you can write good dialogue, but there's no story beyond the fact that these two have like banter. That's not a pilot. That's just a scene. And that scene cannot be 30 pages long. So I think that for me is a thing I've seen in comedy pilots. And I'm like, I love that you can write this, but there's no story here. So I'm still bored of this banter 2 pages,
Yeah, I'll totally. Yeah, that was exactly going to be mine as well. Like just when 2 people are just like sitting like on the couch and just like having witty back and forth. A little bit of that I think is fine, but my big thing would be to just make sure stuff happens. Have stuff happen early. If something crazy and interesting and funny is happening on page 1 that like propels the characters forward and forces them to make actions, I think that's really great. I think there is a tendency to just have sort of witty people just shoot zingers back and forth, but I definitely would say like make sure stuff is happening in the pilot. And also if there's a big just add on, like if your pilot has some kind of like big inciting incident, I would also suggest like have it early. Like there are sometimes people will have like the big crazy thing happen like at the end of the pilot, and I would say if is there a way to have that happen in the first few pages and really explore the sort of aftermath of the crazy interesting thing, as opposed to like having 30 minutes of build up and then like right at the end, oh, here's the crazy thing and here's the show,
That's great. I've definitely read pilots where the big cliffhanger, big thing happens at the end, and then I'm like, awesome, episode 2 would have been a great pilot.
That's true. I think that's a great one. It's just like don't save the best for last. Like most readers are not gonna make it that far if that's what you're gonna do. And I've done 2 internships, and like I felt bad because I was like, oh, I'm a writer. I would feel bad if the person reading my script didn't read the whole thing. So I used to read all of the shitty scripts, and then my bosses were like, they were managers, and they both told me like, just don't read past page 10. Like we don't need to be this nice. And they were very lovely people. Like they're very chill, like they want to help you and they're trying to rep people kind of bosses. And they were like, look, we just don't read it past 10. Like we can't, if that's where it's getting good, because it was a lot of feature scripts I was reading, but like if we're not getting to that point and no one's going to wait that long to see. But another thing that I was thinking is just for and this is for comedy specifically, is decide what your show's tone is for a comedy. Like, it cannot be a multicam dramedy, but also The Sopranos somehow and Simpsons. Like, you cannot have those four tones in one show, because then it just makes it like, what am I reading right now? Is it, you can 100% like mix genre and have it be a dramedy, but like there is still a tone thing of like it needs to be consistent. Are we laughing at people with their organs out, or are we not? Like, you need to make that decision. This is going to be my metric from now.
Yeah.
It's Vidhya's Bechtel test.
Yes. Are we laughing at people getting their organs harvested, or are we not? That shall be new law. Thank you. We have a great question.
But like, I just think.
Oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna move on to our next question, but I totally agree with you on the point about tone, and I do think there are very successful genre mixes and tone mixes, but it has to be done and executed deliberately and not from a point of just not being able to decide.
Yeah, I think it's just like, don't try to have all of your cake and eat it too, and not every show can be Fargo, but like whatever it is, have it be consistent throughout. I think it's just like the problem is not picking one and kind of going from one to the other to back to something else, and then you're not sure what kind of show you're in. It's like how when it's a movie, it's like, are we watching a horror movie? Are we watching a slasher? Are we watching a revenge film? Like, there needs to be some sense of like what the emotion is and what the characters are feeling that we want to be tracking consistently. So the characters need to react consistently to whatever situation they're in. And when you start fucking that up a little bit, I'm sorry, can I swear on this? If you mess with that,
sure.
If you mess with that, I think it just messes with the reader's understanding of what they're tracking for 30 pages.
And speaking of 30 pages, so, half hours are typically still, comedies are still typically half hours. So Vivian N is asking, what's your advice in fitting a full story arc in just 30 minutes? I mean, that's tight. It's not too many pages to introduce the world and characters and relationships. So any advice on that?
I think like outlining and paying attention to like the structure before you get to draft is really helpful for that, because then you can be sure that like there's like an appropriate amount of story in each of your acts, right? Like I feel like when things go like way over, a lot of the time it's because like there's just too much stuff happening. There's too much story to fit in 30 pages. So paying attention to the structure at the outline stage. Also, yeah, just making sure that like, you're being ruthless, like just cut ruthlessly. Does every single thing that's in there need to be there? Can you cut this scene? Can you condense scenes? Can you like enter the scene later? Do you need people like entering and then greeting everyone, or can you just like cut into the middle of the conversation and then cut out? You don't need to see people leaving, stuff like that. I think that can all like help keep stuff tight.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think is like you have to cut ruthlessly with comedy, and I think that's where broadcast, I think comedies are like such a gold standard. It's like that 22-minute pilot is such tight writing. Like, it's only things that need to be there are there, and everything else is just out of there. My thing when you say full story arc, I generally am like, you're not writing a full story arc in a 30-minute pilot. That's not what you're doing. You're writing a story that's a beginning of something that we want to watch for a season. So you're not finishing any story in a pilot, and you're not giving your character an arc with a pilot. And I think the good comedy pilot and a drama pilot also, I think, is just starting at a place where the character we're just like super interested in, and ending in a place where we're like, holy shit, what are they going to do now? So there isn't really an arc there. It's more just like Paul was saying, it's the inciting incident is usually the pilot, and what drives that whole episode of the pilot is like, oh, their life was a certain way, something happened, what are they going to do now? And the ways in which they try to solve it, and by the end of the pilot, they're like, oh, well, that didn't work. How am I going to solve it now? They try something else. That doesn't go super well, but it kind of puts a Band-Aid on the situation, but you're still like, well, how are they going to handle their new normal? And that's where you want to leave us. So it's not a full story arc.
And I'll just add, I really love that, and I totally agree with that. And I'll just add on, I think it ties to what we were talking about earlier with the like people sitting around doing witty banter. You know, like just take a look at all of your dialogue, and if you can cut out dialogue between two people, even if it's funny, you know, even if you think it's funny, but if you can cut it out and it wouldn't change anything about the story, just cut it out. Just get rid of it. Like everything should just move the story forward.
Speaking of characters, China Ofer is Zor Ofer is asking, what process do you go through when developing characters, and how do you make them seem like real, authentic people? And I would say authentic to the world you've created.
For me, I think that really is mine from my personal life very, very much. So I start from a character. I base my characters on people I know, and that really helps me. I'm like, oh, well, how do I make my character seem real? I just base them on real people. Like, it's such a simple thing to say, but it works so well. It's like, just take a person you know, and you know a lot of, like, life is so much stranger than fiction. There's so many good people around you, and if you just get to know them a little bit, you're like, holy shit, how is this a person? How is this a person who collects like hotel soaps in a suitcase that's locked away like 3 feet under their basement in a bunker? Like, and there is someone like that probably in your life. I'm not even joking. Like, you just don't know that yet. So it's just a matter of like really thinking about the people you know and mining them for like your characters. And it doesn't have to be like word for word, this person is my character in my TV show, but like what's weird about them, what's specific about them, and also like adding their nuances that really just make them 3-dimensional. Because I was thinking like I was on a Disney kids TV show, Meet a Royal Detective, and for that show, I think the easiest thing for me to do was just like think about I have a 4-year-old niece, and I was like, I'm writing, she is the audience I'm writing for. I'm just gonna do like characteristics, lessons, things that she does that annoy me, things that she does that I love, things that she does that are cute. I'm gonna just pull all of that and put it in the show. It's like so simple to do. I created a character in that show based on her. I am the best aunt ever. I'm sorry.
Just, I was just like, is she getting that residual check though? You putting away some of that for her?
Honestly, I would have made that happen if she lived here. I'm not even joking. Nepotism, baby.
A part of me's like, have you based the character off me? And if you have, should I be offended or flattered? But we can talk about that offline.
You'll never know.
There is a character named Hess, and she's just so loud. Paul, how about you? How are you creating characters?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Vidhya said. Yeah, like just mining people that I know. Sometimes combining people's like take this weird thing from this person and smush it together with this weird thing from this other person. That's always a nice thing. And yeah, I think like weirdness and specificity, like people feel specificity feels authentic, you know? And so like anything that you can do to, because I think you can start off with like a base type of character. This is, you know, let's say this is like a, you know, it's a you know, working single mom, right? Like that conjures an image, but then how can you like take it away from that and make it like specific? Like what hobbies or interests did they have that like we might not have seen before in a character like that, right? So just like adding things that you can
She
like
sells
thread in that
weed.
feel specific to
See,
you.
you have a whole
Yeah,
TV
exactly.
show.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
already
exactly.
a TV show, guys.
That was
Right.
the joke, Jess.
Yeah.
Oh.
But that's why that character like pops and feels like interesting. It's because like, you know, hadn't seen that you know, single mom doing that before. So that kind of like so yeah, I think specificity, weirdness, unexpectedness always helps like round out characters.
Yeah. Oh, we have a great question. Great question from Hang Win. What do you do when you have writer's block?
Just write garbage. Just like start typing. Just be the like monkeys, just like clattering random stuff on the keyboard. Because like, yeah, for me, like once I have something down, and even if it's really bad, you know, that like the bad thing will spur on an idea, and that's a way to get momentum. So yeah.
I agree with that. I think, yeah, just write something out. For me, I think in between when I finish something new and then start something next, I do have like a period where I'm like, I don't know what I want to write. I want to write so many things. I want to write nothing. Do I want to be a writer? Like, it's a whole process that I go through every time I finish a project. But I think for me, I just honestly sometimes just take a break. Like, I realize sometimes that just that process of being at a computer every day and having to do that every day makes me like lethargic to do it at a certain point. And like that little like excitement that I usually have is like, oh, well, this is my job and I have to do this on my own time. And it's like sometimes there is just like this weird, you know, it's like when this is a bad joke, but like there's a joke in Friends where they're just like, oh, you know, this Rachel's dating a guy, and then he's a gynecologist, and when they go back to her place, he's like, you know, I just have been looking at one all day, and now I just don't want to. You know how sometimes it feels weird because it's like, and it's that feeling sometimes of like how doing too much of it is also counterproductive. And for me personally, I found just taking one day off or like 2 days off really, really helps. And when I say off, I mean no devices. Like I will not use my phone. I'm not gonna go on Twitter. I'm not gonna go on social media. I'm not gonna like, and if I do feel like I'm gonna write something on those 2 days, I won't write it down. And it's weirdly like it's such a weird specific thing, and I've only discovered it in the past year, but I found it to be very helpful. Where I'm like, oh, there's this weird thing of like I told myself not to do it, so now I really want to do it. I'm not gonna write, so I really want to write. And then there's this weird moment of like, oh, I have all these ideas all of a sudden, and I force myself not to do it. And then 2 days later, I find that writer's block is kind of cleared out. So that's my specific thing, and it's just worked for me. So
yeah, taking breaks is super key. Totally agree with that.
We have a great question from Joe B. So what do you do when you go back to a pilot, you've read it with fresh eyes and you don't find it funny? How do you revise the material to make it hit? Or at a certain point, is there a certain point where you just call it a lost cause and move on to the next thing?
I think going back and reading stuff and not finding it funny anymore in a way is good, because it means that like you probably like, you might be a better writer. You know what I mean? Like you might have improved since the last time. If you're like, oh, I could beat this, like I can be funnier. I feel like that's kind of like a nice instinct to have in a way. So yeah, like, yeah, take another pass. Like see if you can like punch it up, see if you can beat whatever you wrote last time. Show it to people, you know, like what we talked about before, like get feedback, like, because sometimes I think the thing to be wary of as well is like sometimes it might be just as funny, but because you've been living in that world for like, you know, however many months, it's just it's like just nonsensical sounds to you. Like you can't even feel the humor in it anymore. So just be aware of that. Make sure it's not just that you're so in it that like you no longer experience the like surprise and unexpectedness that makes it funny, whereas someone reading it fresh might. So I do think that's why it's important to get feedback. Because yeah, when you're on like draft 6 or whatever, like nothing is funny anymore, you know? So.
Vidhya, anything to add?
It's just like if you've lived in something long. Oh yeah, I was just saying that's a good point. It's can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it's just like a lag. I think it's just if you have been living in that world for too long, it is hard to find things funny. But if you're going back to something after a while and you're not impressed, it's either kind of, for me, I always just redo an outline from there. If it's something I want to revive, I redo an outline and I just ask myself those questions about character and what is the show about? Like, what is the show actually about? Because if it's not funny as a whole, that's what you need to redo and revise. But if it is just dialogue stuff that's not funny, that's punch up. Like, that's not hard to do. You can just kind of do a feedback round and then kind of punch up whatever you've written already. That stuff is easy. Like, that's not a hard thing to do. But I think if it's something that you're like, oh, I'm just not impressed, I don't find this interesting, I would like there's like questions you should ask yourself about, like, what is the show? Who am I watching? What is interesting about it? What did you like about it? What did you find funny about it when you wrote the pilot? And kind of revisiting those things, and then see if your pilot has just kind of veered in a different direction from what you started out with. And that's why it's not funny. Because usually with a comedy pilot, you're starting out with something that you think is inherently funny. You're just like, this seems like a funny idea to me. I want to see what happens when I put this character in this situation and, see where that goes. So I think usually when I find something is not as funny when I go back to it, it's because it's not what I started out trying to do, and it's just gone in a different direction over a round of drafts. So I would just like kind of redo an outline and re-examine what the show's about.
Awesome. Well, I think that about wraps up all the time we have today. I know, Vidhya, you are you're doing this in the midst of a vacation, so let's get you out back into your vacation mode. But I just want to thank both of you guys.
Working.
Working. We're all technically working. No, but thank you both so much for coming out and speaking to everyone today. Congratulations, both of you, for the amazing strides you've made since you've been in our program. I'm so proud. Proud Asian mom that will give you the validation your real mom won't give to you. So thanks for coming back and speaking to us. Again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And I want to thank our amazing 2020 Cape New Writer sponsors. So that's Comcast, NBC Universal, HFPA, Pearl Studio, Walt Disney Television and the Walt Disney Company, Amazon Studios, LA County Arts and Culture, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, Final Draft, and Film Independent. As well, remember that our submissions are currently open for our Cape New Writers Fellowship 2021. Again, dropping the link on the bottom. Please visit our website for more information. Cape is a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you are able to, please consider a donation so we can continue doing these virtual programs for free. We don't want to charge money. We want to make this accessible for everyone. But, it costs money to keep the lights on. So if you can, please consider to give. And if not, you can help us by taking a survey. This helps us with funding, sponsorships, grants, all that good stuff. And the link is right there, surveymonkey.com/r/Cape Comedy. But thank you guys so much. I hope you have a great rest of your night and a great rest of your week. Please stay safe, stay sane, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Bye.